So welcome everyone. Tonight we are going to have our inaugural class of 405, which is the distribution class, and our fabulous instructor, Geoff Westapher. You all know me, but Geoff has come to do some sessions here in Portland, and now he's going to run this whole class from Dallas.
After tonight.
Yes, so I'll let Geoff take it away, and I'm just here to help him navigate our Canvas platform until he's on his own in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I hope everybody can hear me well, and if you can't, let me know. Hit me back. I'm here in beautiful downtown Portland at these wonderful Portland State studios.
Yes.
Well appointed and ready to go for you. Now, I give you a little bit about my background. If you don't know, I have spent my entire professional career in the alcoholic beverage business, specifically beer, which spans a few decades, quite a while. And I've in that time, I've been in about every position that you can imagine, with the exception of actually producing the product. I haven't really brewed any beer, but I've sold it, distributed it, and everything that's goes with the industry. And in this class, we're going to talk about understanding distribution. My goal is to impart upon all of you some knowledge that I've acquired of how all this comes together in the industry, which will cover not only beer, but ciders and some wines and spirits too. You'll have a chance to get a understanding of not only how it works, but give you some clue of what you might be facing, what you will be facing, and what options you may have, and how to approach it. In other words, you won't be just a novice when you go out there, because if you actually do this and produce and build a brewery or a winery or a cideria or whatever you want to call it.
You made it sound so Spanish.
Spanish, yeah. Then I've always said that's only half the battle, because once you do this, the next job is access to market. In other words, how do you get your product or products to the market, to the consumer? And in today's business world, in alcohol beverage, it's not so easy. Sort of the analogy I like to give is, if you can picture an hourglass with a top and a bottom. The top is the manufacturer, the brewery, let's say in this case, full of sand. The very bottom is the retailer, and the middle is the middle tier, which we'll talk about here in a second. So the sand has to go through to get to the bottom, and that middle tier right now is pretty tight, and the sand doesn't really flow through the middle piece as smoothly as you would hope that it would. So what we're going to do is talk about that and in this class, and all the various components that go through it, so you can get your product ultimately to the consumer and build your business. Now, and that will include not only the on-premise, but the off-premise, various components to it, planning and other parts of distribution, including pricing and promotions and calendars, and all those fine pieces that all put together that can get you to be a successful business person in this industry. Okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds pretty good, huh? So some of you I know have seen some of this. Some of you may have already seen some video on this already. And we're going to kind of touch on all those again, but we're going to start today with sort of an update of what's going on in the industry since those were originally done, which has been a couple months, and we did those. And because this industry is very fluid, it's in a constant state of change. These things are always moving on, and especially with what's going on in today's business world in this industry with the tremendous growth of the craft piece of it, which has sort of changed everything, or in the process of changing everything. So unless somebody has a comment, I'm going to go ahead and start with the presentation tonight. All right. First of all, let's talk about or review how the three-tier system works. Three-tier system is the way to get product to the marketplace that was created after Prohibition was rescinded around 1930. It was came about because prior to Prohibition, the way product got to market, beer in particular, was through the reach straight from the manufacturer to the retailer, and the retailer back in those days was a tied house. In other words, a tied house was where the brewery or manufacturer actually owned the retailer. There was no middle tier with it. So you could go into a bar, and the only thing that you could find in the bar was a product that belonged to that particular brewer. You couldn't, if you were in St. Louis and you went in and bought a Budweiser, you couldn't ask for any other beer. That's all they had was Budweiser. It was violated antitrust laws prior to that, and so to get when Prohibition was repealed, one of the keys that was presented to the government rescinding it was that we'll go to a three-tier system. Well, the three-tier system not only eliminated the tied houses, but it also helped create thousands of jobs, because at this point we were in the middle of a recession. And unemployment wasn't at that time in our history, was it sugar-coated, shall we say, as it might be today. Unemployment was about 25% of the workforce. So when Prohibition was repealed, the breweries promised the government that not only they get the taxes and get the three-tier system, but it also created over 10,000 jobs, which was a big deal back then. So that's how the three-tier system came into being, where you had the manufacturer or the brewery here in this particular picture would sell straight to a wholesaler or a distributor. The distributor would sell to a retailer, and then the retailer was the ultimate, was the last, the consumer would come in and they would purchase the product. So you can see the drivers here, that where the arrows are. The drivers in the system are the wholesaler and the retailer through it. Now, as you'll find out, you can, in some cases, in some states, bypass the wholesaler if you self-distribute. And we'll get into that here in a second. But this will explain to you the three-tier system and how it works for beer, okay? And this is not changing. This is in existence, and it is under attack, but it's not changing at this point. So what's driving the changes in distribution for beer, wine, and spirits and ciders and RTDs, ready to drink, right now at this point? Basically, the beer industry was relatively static, if you will, until the last 10 years. And it's been because of the accelerated growth of crafts that's really happened in the last 10 years. They existed, but consider that in 1980, there were less than 50 breweries in the United States. Well, today, there's over 3,000. And they're actually growing at 1.5 a day. Now, many of these are brew pubs that aren't going to be big breweries. I call them 10-barrel breweries. Is pretty much what I call them. And the cost of entry is relatively low. It's relatively easy to get into a 10-barrel brewery, especially if you're going to just sell kegs only. It's relatively easy. But the crafts have created a paradigm shift in the brewing and wine and spirits industry. Today, through 2014, the craft industry, as defined by the Brewers Association, is 18.6% through 2014. But all in all, that's roughly 10% of the total U.S. beer business. Now there's 200 million barrels, round numbers, in actual volume, but that's down from 209 million barrels in recent, or even more, and that's due to wine and spirits, change in drinking and so forth.
Well, Geoff actually was telling me that that Budweiser ad that we've been talking about did help them get a sales spike.
Yeah,
so there you go. They're coming back with their like big giant ad.
we can circle back around at the end and kind of discuss that, but and I appreciate all y'all responding to that. I'd like to see your comments to the ones that have. It's been interesting to see, but initially, so far, it's been positive for Budweiser, but that's so far. So as I was saying, these changes are beginning to take place in the industry, and it's primarily due to the growth of craft beers in the overall business today. Now, distribution, some key issues as a manufacturer. These are the things that you will face moving forward. Is number one, makes me want one too. Access to market. That's number one. In other words, how do you get your product to market? Because it's not so easy. You just can't start brewing and just go straight to market. It's not as easy as ABC. Getting the focus and commitment from distributor for your products or your brands. That's number two. And then if things don't work out, and sometimes you're going to need a divorce, is the availability for a vendor, a brewer, or distiller, how to get out. Franchise laws come into effect here, which protect the wholesaler more so than you. Pricing and margin enhancement that come here. How your beer or product is priced in the marketplace. Attacks by all parties to the legislative battlefield on both the state and national level. And this is a really big issue today because of what's going on. As the size of the craft brewers increases, they become more politically active. They are building packs. And they're well funded, and they're going against the distributors. And they're actually making good headway in this. And that's a good thing. It really is. It's a good thing because the middle tier of the distributors right now at this particular point is what's holding up access to market for all the new products and even established products to someone. So that's some of the key issues that we're seeing in this slide. Going on to the next. Now, some of the trends going along with that, manufacturers are looking for other options, either through a distributor or the ability to self-distribute. So, in a number of state franchise laws restrict your options. That's not so true up here in the Northwest, but in other parts of the country, you may not have the right to self-distribute. A lot of that's changed recently, and again, that goes back to the political issues that are coming about in the state capitals at this point. As right now, the spotlight in the U.S. is on the state of Florida, because Florida is sort of a Johnny-come-lately state to crafts. If you kind of draw, if you drew a straight line from Seattle, Portland, all the way down to Miami, you'd see indexed that this part of the world, I would say you're over-indexed in this part of the world, per se, I guess you would.
Indexed in terms
of size of craft.
Oh, we have a lot more, yeah.
Because the volume in this state, these two states, roughly 50% of all beer sold up here is crafts, and you have over 60% of the dollars come from high-end or crafts up here. Whereas if you go the other end of it, you'd have Florida, which is probably the least indexed or under-indexed as it is in the Southeast, and to some degree Southwest, but not so much the Southeast. So although everything up above is indexed where you think it would be, and everything below that line is under-indexed versus craft. So that makes it a great opportunity for craft beers. So all this is changing in Florida. Well, Florida they don't have any carve-out laws, but they're looking at for carve-out laws, and carve-out laws are where if you're married to a wholesaler, if you're a wholesaler, and you'd like to leave, a carve-out law is in place. Yeah, you're right, David. A carve-out law is in place, which means that if you're at a certain percent of a distributor's business and it falls under the carve-out, 1%, 2% of a distributor's business, you have an exit strategy. You can go in, and based on the state franchise laws or statutes, you can write a check, negotiate an agreement, and you can leave, and you can find another wholesaler to represent your products in the marketplace. So that's what a carve-out law is. A lot of states have them, but some of them don't, and some of them you can argue, depending upon what side you are fair or not. So those are coming out of Florida because they don't have them. Florida is also asking for 5-year agreements if they're less than 50% of a wholesaler's business. Well, if you take all of your wholesalers in Florida, there's only 2 brands that represent more than 50% of a wholesaler's business in Florida. That's either Anheuser-Busch and Miller Coors. Everything else falls under 50%, so you can imagine wholesalers are screaming. These guys are protected by franchise laws, and basically franchise laws are perpetual in beer. In other words, they last forever. You can't end it. Well, they're forever, and so in this case, they're asking for 5-year agreements. Now, on the other side of the coin, in the spirits industry, and mostly in wines, those contracts are already time-bound. In many cases, in most cases, they're 5-year agreements. And they're also bound by performance basis. In other words, so much volume, so many cases have to be hit annually and during the 5-year period. And at the end of the 5-year period, you can opt out if those particular goals have not been achieved at that
by the distributor.
Point. By the distributor, right. And then there's no cost. It's just end of the agreement. You work out a deal with the inventory, and you say adios, and off you go. So the wholesaler is asking for a 5-year agreement. It's not going to happen, especially at 50%. It's just not going to happen. But it's a negotiating starting point. Is the best way to put it. Retail rights. Also, this is in Florida. Brewers' right to maintain tasting rooms. They have that right at the moment. They want multiple tasting rooms, is what they're looking for brewers. And it's fair if you have a brewery in Orlando and open one in Tampa, and they want that right. And wholesalers are screaming, no, they don't. And then self-distribution up to 5,000 barrels. In other words, if you're a brewery in Orlando, let's say, and you start self-distributing, you have that ability to do that, and you can self-distribute in that area or wherever you want to, really, up to 5,000 barrels per year. And wholesalers don't want you to go over 5,000. They're actually fighting here to keep out self-distribution. They don't think it's fair. Now, you're sitting there thinking to yourself, why would they say that? Because you're actually building the brand for them, or for down the road, 5,000 barrels. Because if you are if you start out and you're doing kegs, well, you go to the retail market, they give you a handle. They're just not going to put a box in there and put your handle on it. They're going to take somebody's beer off to put your beer on tap. And more than likely, that beer that they take off is going to come from that current distributor. It's either going to be AB or Miller Coors or somebody else that's fighting against this. So in essence, you're not only building the brand, but you're hurting them, because their beer is coming off, your beer comes on, and if the consumer likes your beer, they're going to go to it. So you can see where the distributor's coming from. They see this maybe as a plus because you're spending your resources specifically financially. And as we get into this class further on, you'll see how this all unfolds. But you're hurting the other side of the pocket. You're taking business out of their pocket, too, at the same time. So you can see why they're fighting this because for many decades, they've pretty much had their cake to eat it too.
So Ryan's asking if this is true for all states or just Florida.
Well, franchise laws exist in all states.
But these particular items are at the forefront right now, and everybody's following them.
Well, this is sort of the personification of these issues. Some are 2,000 barrels, some are 10,000 barrels. There's usually some kind of barrel rule. Not up here, though. I mean, you can pretty much do whatever you want to up here to self-distribute. I mean, Pullman Brewing Company has been self-distributing up here. They were self-distributing when I was here, which is almost 25 years ago. So it's quite a while.
But Portland, Oregon's been more craft friendly, and Florida's become the battleground for what they think could happen in other states.
Yeah, and it's going on in most of the southern states too. So that's why craft beers kind of got started in this part of the world and in California, the West Coast, is because they were the legislative and the environment, if you will, was craft friendly. They gave them all the options to be able to get it, and plus it's at the time it was sort of climate friendly too, to build higher ABV alcohol by volume products. In addition, craft manufacturers want to be able to sell the distribution rights instead of awarding those rights for free. Historically, if rights have been granted to wholesalers for free, they're coming into a market. So you start a brewery, you self-distribute, you go out and you build that volume, you spend the money for trucks, for personnel, for equipment, for taps, cooperage, which you got to do anyway, training, you got to pay workman's comp insurance, you've got to do all those things that you have to do to self-distribute. You're successful, you've got 1,000 tap handles in the marketplace, let's say, you're selling 10,000 barrels a year. Well, then at this point you decide, okay, well, I've got to raise more capital, I've got to put more tanks in, I want to put packaging lines in, I want to really grow the business. So for me to do that, I've decided I'm going to focus all my efforts on the brewery side of it. And so I'm going to get out of the distributing side of it. I want to sell my rights. Well, you interview all the distributors in your market, and then you decide which one's the best, and you want to sell that right, or sell that 10,000 barrels. In other words, you build it at 10,000 barrels, you should have the right to enjoy the fruits of your efforts, and you should be able to sell it, and you should be able to make a nice little profit off of it. And a distributor should be willing to write you a check for that right. It's negotiable. You can come up with a price that's fair to you and fair to the distributor. But in many states, like in Texas, the Texas beer wholesalers, politically powerful like beer wholesalers are in most states, got the statutes changed 3 years ago and took away those rights for craft brewers or any brewers to sell those distribution rights. There's no time span. That's all negotiable. It can be all cash up front, or you could do that over time, or you could actually do it, and this has been done before, you could actually do it on volume too, but that could be dangerous for you. In other words, okay, the distributor sells 10,000 barrels a year, and they give you so much per year based on their volume. What you risk is the volume going down because you lose control over the distribution and the sales of it and the pricing of it and all that, because you lose that control, or you're at risk of that coming back. So, it's better to get that all up front. And believe me, I can't think of too many distributors that don't have that kind of money. Believe me, being a distributor today is one of the best. What are these three craft brewers are fighting this? Well, the lead brewer in Texas is Peticolas in Dallas. Michael Peticolas. Michael Peticolas happens to be He's been in business 3 years. He happens to be, by training and education, a trial attorney.
That's helpful.
Yeah, and he actually he's 7th generation trial attorney in Texas. So his family goes way back. So in my conversation with him last month, they'll win this. There's no doubt that they'll win this. It'll probably be appealed to the Supreme Court of Texas, but they'll win this. It'll take time. I don't see them losing this battle at all, because there's history here, and there's actually been another brewery that sold the rights in Texas before the statutes were changed. In fact, the state legislator that actually helped the beer guys to get this passed, the craft brewers got together and started a PAC, raised money, and got them thrown out of office. So that gives you some kind of an idea of what political power can happen if you've got enough clout, so to speak. So this gives you an idea. Signing onto a distributor, don't they need to buy you out a certain amount of projected revenue that you have been delivering to?
In the states where they have to buy you out.
In the states? Well, are you talking about, Ryan, are you talking about the actual price of the distribution rights? Is that what you're talking about? Yes, okay. Well, the general term is a multiple of gross profit, 1 year gross profit. So, gross profit. So if you do, let's say you do $100,000 of gross profit in 1 year, it'll be a multiple of that $100,000. It could be, typically, I don't know if there's a typical number, 2.5 times, see? Mm-hmm. 3 times is typically what if you go back to the carve-out laws that we talked about earlier, typically state franchise laws or statutes will talk about 3 times gross profit. But if your trends are like this and going up straight up, it can be, 5, 6. I've seen it 8, 8.5. Actually, no, 1 to 10 times gross profit.
Who is that?
Windy City.
Oh, Windy City.
Yeah, Windy City in Chicago, for all y'all that in that part of the world. But it can be that way. Now, I will tell you this: if you bring somebody in from the outside to make an evaluation, and sometimes brewers do that, is to get a consultant or an expert. And I've done this as expert witness. I've done 9 expert witness cases in my life. Many of them have been evaluations of brands. If you do a discounted cash evaluation, and I don't know if you go with this in finance and accounting, but if you do a discounted cash thing, the courts will not allow that. If you go to arbitration or go into courts, the last 3 cases have been thrown out because there's too many moving parts in doing a discounted cash thing. Although I think it's really good for a business, but for a brand, it's not really good. So a multiple, all 3 times a multiple, has been what the courts will allow as a true valuation of a brand. So keep that in mind as you go down the list. So, maybe this is getting a little away from this, but it kind of gives you an idea of what's available out there. And I really think that if you self-distribute, you should have the right to sell your brand, sell the distribution rights, because that's what you've done. It's sweat equity is what it is. And you've got a lot of investment, you should be paid back for it and not just give it away, which has been historic in marketplace. In my background, I worked at Coors Brewing Company for a number of years. I spent 20 years working with Coors, and I worked in the distributor development department, and it helped assign Pennsylvania and Delaware, and Coors assigned them for free. So that was really, of course, the investment to start was substantial. We're talking millions. for the investment, but the brand rights were for free. And that did not guarantee you that you were going to make it, because in the early years they went Coors only standalone distributors, and from the mid-70s onward, the majority of them went under, sold out, because they couldn't make it at that time. And then they had to go to multi-brand houses and so forth. Before that, they were gold mines. Anyway, that gives you a little bit of an idea of what you're coming up with. Distributor appointments, when you go out and you're looking for a distributor, in other words, a distributor will look at, to you, some of the things, the questions that are going to come back. And when you set up a meeting with a potential distributor for your brands, first thing you want to know is a quality product. And you're going to hear this in other videos that you see, like from Point Blank. When you see that one, that's their number one issue. Is the brand a quality product? That's key. Then pricing comes into an issue. At what price points? And that's a whole show we got coming up here in the coming weeks. Is pricing your product? Are the price point realistic? Are the margins realistic? That's a big issue with distributors. Can they get the margins that they want? If you look at the price points and you want a certain margin for your product in the marketplace to make it, you might think, well, I need 38%, I need 40%, I need 50% margin. Well, that's going to affect the margins that the distributor is going to make, and that's going to affect the margins the consumer is going to pay for, which ultimately will affect how much you sell. So distributors always look at the higher the margins, the happier they are. But if you sell 10 cases at 30%, is that good, or do you want to sell 1,000 cases at 25%? You tell me. I'm in for the 1,000 cases, boy. You know, everybody. I'm for volume at 25%, because one thing you will always hear is it's really hard to take margins to the bank, but it's real easy to take money to the bank. What are your commitments? They want to know financially how financially sound your brewery is. In other words, if you're a startup operation, well, they're going to have a lot of questions. They're going to want to know, can you last? What kind of people do you have? Do you have the experience? What are the skill sets of your people, of you yourself, and the skill sets? Do you know what you're talking about? That's why you're in the class. You're here to learn. We're here to impart to you the knowledge that you'll need. What's your marketing? What's your promotions? What's your incentive programs? And we cover these in this class. And we cover them in detail. You'll be able to ask questions. Sales. What are your goals in sales? What do you want to accomplish in sales? What your historic sales trends, if you have them, are. So and are your expectations, and this is real key, are they realistic? You can't go into a wholesaler and say, well, I expect you to sell 10,000 barrels this year, but we don't have a whole lot of marketing to support that with. So, I mean, that's pretty much over the top, but that's kind of what they're looking at. So those are the kind of questions you're going to get in distributor appointments. And we cover this in the video too. That if you haven't seen it, you'll see that too. It is is your management knowledgeable and experienced in the industry, and that's real key. I've had startup craft brewers come call on me running big operations in the United States, and they really had no knowledge. And I can give you a good example is New Belgium. In the early years when New Belgium started up, for those of you, Fat Tire in the markets that it's available, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's the fourth largest craft brewery in the United States now, and they only started in 1990 or 91 brewing beer in a bathtub in Fort Collins, Colorado, and now their goal this year is 800,000 barrels. No, they're going to pass 1 million barrels this year in sales. So 1991 to today, 1 million barrels, and they're not in all the states yet. Well, they hired the culture, and they had a sort of a 60s culture, and their people didn't know how to sell beer. And eventually they hit a wall. And Sierra Nevada did the same thing, and all of them did the same thing, and they changed. And so, again, the distributors are going to ask that. It's going to be key. It's going to be key, and I cover this again too in future in the videos that you'll see. And then you have the retail side of it. So now you talk to the middle tier, the wholesaler. Now you got to talk to the retailer. And so a key is in the chains. If you're going off premise, you get packages. If you're cans or bottles, but the chain buying done locally, which gives you a leg up. And then the first thing the chain wants to know is who your distributor is. Well, if you're the distributor, they're going to want to know is how you're going to service it. Are you able to service it? Do you have the trucks? Do you have the people? Do you have the merchandise? But if you go with a big boy like a Budweiser or Miller Coors or even a Craft Pacific that's been around for a while, well, they'll be able to do it. Today, kind of the cans are the hot package, the preferred package, or the requested package. Not to say that you should. Bombers are still big. Glass is still big. It depends on your strategy, the image you want to take. Pay to play is a business model in the on-premise. Now, Doctor here has asked me to explain what pay to play is in the marketplace. Pay to play is buying retail accounts. In other words, breaking the law. And it's become rampant today. It's over the top. Trying to get a handle in the on-premise is, whether the retailer buys one and gets a keg free, or buys one and gets 3 free. And I said that, buy one keg, get 3 free. That's how Miller got started in Louisiana and New Orleans in the 70s. Schlitz had 80% of the market in New Orleans, and Miller wanted to focus on New Orleans, so they came in, they owned the distributorship, and they told the retailers in the French Quarter, buy 1 keg of Miller and we'll give you 3 free. Now, you go, holy cow, how can you do that? Well, you can actually legally do that if you offer it to every account in the marketplace. And that's still pretty much the way it is today, but if you're selective, it's illegal and you can't do it. But that's what pay to play is. And whether you do it cash under the table, or you do it on a credit card basis, or you do it any other way, you do it through a third party. If the retailer set up a marketing company, which is pretty standard, and you funnel money through them, you're basically paying for the business.
So this is going on in every state?
Every state, every market, every city. That crafts are really going crazy. Distributors aren't going to do that because I'll tell you what's at stake. It's your federal basic permit or your state license to do business. You get caught, you get fined. You get fined, you may lose business. Where's the accountability? See, that's it. Your license is where if you get caught, is what's at stake. So, is it worth it? If you're willing to play, you better be willing to pay. And is it worth it to you? So if you invest $500,000 in a brewery and you want to lose it for a keg, it's your business.
But you're saying everybody's doing it.
Everybody's doing it. So, well, I should say a lot of people are doing it.
But it's done directly by the breweries, not by the distributors.
It's done directly by the breweries, not done by the distributors, because the distributors don't do it. They don't need to do it. They're covered by franchise laws. They don't need to do it. It's not fun, guys. So getting distribution in today's industry is the overall number one challenge for craft manufacturers, and distribution is 2 parts. It's through the wholesaler and through the retailer. That's your number one challenge today, is getting access to market, and you can see it in whatever you read in the industry pubs. That's all they talk about, is access to market. And if you come up here to the Craft Brewers Convention this spring, that's going to be the number one. That's always the number one topic, is it not? And legislative action, changing the laws, and so forth. And wholesalers and retailers are swamped today. I mean, literally swamped. The biggest chain in Texas, where I'm at HEB, which is a big grocery store, they're roughly 8%, 9% of the state's total volume. They have anywhere, they do resets twice a year, 300 to 500 new products in the spring and in the fall. Now, how many can they actually take and put in? So both new and established, are are expanding their portfolio. So even Sierra Nevada and New Belgium, I mean, how many new products are they coming out every spring and fall? It's, you know, it's flavor de jour today. So they've got to go somewhere. I'm not trying to talk down to you, but I'm trying to give you a realistic picture of what you have to face out there. So what's going to make your product enticing to the wholesaler and to the retailer? And that's what we talk about in this class. You know, you're going to learn all this stuff in a class. And they'll give you some ideas on and you may already have ideas, and hopefully you'll share them with us, and we'll be able to provide some feedback going forward in distribution and so forth. As we get into some of this other, I want to tell you some stories here. Train distribution in 2015. What we're seeing today is, in the words of Gunny Sergeant Highway, which comes from the movie Heartbreak Ridge, Clint Eastwood show from the 80s. It's one of my favorite movies. Is you have to adapt, you have to improvise, and you have to overcome. So you're probably thinking, well, what exactly does that mean? Adapt, improvise, and overcome. That's what Mellie said, is what exactly do you mean? So let me give you some stories on how to adapt, improvise, and overcome. My background previously, for about 6 years, I was president of Warsteiner Importers Agency. Warsteiner is a German beer from Warstein, Germany. And for many years, for 20 years, it was only selling beer in Germany. But in the 1980, the owner of the Kramer family decided they wanted to build an export department out of Warstein. And the country that they decided to come to was the U.S., North America specifically. And the reason why, and just to give you an overview, is that 45% of the world's gross profit for beer is in North America. All the European brewers today in Europe is in turmoil in the beer business because sales are going like this for a number of reasons. You know, a lot of it's demographics, but a number of reasons. They're all focusing on China because that's where all the people are, is China. Well, and that's true, but in China, if you look at the gross profit, it's very tiny because in China, as in South America, as you can tell, in South America, monthly or even yearly income is $700 a year. So everything's single serve. I mean, they buy one bottle. So how much gross profit? Now, sure, you can sell a lot of single bottles if you catch on because you got all the people, but the gross profit is in the States. So the Germans, everybody wants to come to North America, so that they came here. So the first president of Warsteiner was a lady by the name of Diane Hankins, or Diane Fall. She was a commodities buyer for Warsteiner. In other words, she flew around the world, mostly Germany, and bought hops in Germany. She left Coors to take this challenge on of establishing Warsteiner, which was a startup deal. And the brewery funded her, so money wasn't an issue. So the first thing she had to do, which is exactly what you will do, is to get label approval from the Treasury Department. So she got the label, followed the restrictions, sent it in, and it was rejected. It was rejected numerous occasions, even when they made the changes to the label. The TTB kept rejecting it, and she couldn't figure out why. So what she did was she got on an airplane. She lived in Denver and flew to Washington, which is where they did it back in those days. Went to the TTB office. Now remember, this is the days before cell phones, before laptops, before any of this. But she had none of that. She went to the TTB office, met all the people, spent the entire week there, went over every morning, brought them coffee and donuts, and sat there in their office and became friends with them. And by the end of the week, after they got to know her, she walked out of there with the label approval for Warsteiner. It took that much effort to get the first label approval. Well, that was number one. Number two was now that she had label approval, she had no distributor. Sound familiar, huh? Nobody would talk to her. And this is at a time when the import segment was taking off like the craft segment is today in the industry. Everybody wanted to get in the import business. Because up until now, it was basically Heineken was it in the U.S. So she couldn't find a distributor, even in Denver, where she was from, even as she had a Coors background. So since she was a commodities buyer for Coors, she had a relationship with Bill Coors. She knew who Bill Coors' charity was, favorite charity was. So what she did was she decided to have a dinner at the Brown Palace, where she rented out the dining room there to honor Bill Coors as a philanthropist. Yeah, you got it. Tongue-tied here. Excuse me. Let me get a glass of water. There you go. Here, a glass of water. Honor him and his number one charity. Invited Bill. Bill said, okay, obviously, because it was all the funds were going to his charity. So based on this, invitation was sent out. Of course, all the beer wholesalers were going to come because it's Bill Coors and it's for charity, so they all showed up. The place was packed. Bill got up, spoke. The charity was there, and during his speech, he mentioned what a great lady Diane was and what a great beer Warsteiner was. And at the end of the evening, after it was all said and done, she had her first distributor and she had her first container ordered from a distributor in Denver. So that's how she got distribution in Denver, and that's where she started from, was at that point. So that's two of them, two examples. And the third example I'm going to give you, fast forward a couple of years, things were going relatively well. She was expanding around the United States where she could pick and choose. I was actually one of the first distributors in Texas at the time, back in those days. So she's in Arizona, but the largest chain out of Phoenix, big chain, chains do the business in the United States if you want volume, refused to put Warsteiner in. So she went to see the buyer in Phoenix. She flew down, and the buyer told her, well, you have good beer, but you don't advertise. And this was kind of what retailers would say in those days, is, you don't have any media advertising above the line, electronic media. So what she did, she left. And so what she did is she figured out where the buyer for this chain lived, followed him home, followed him back the next morning, figured out what direction he drove back and forth to work every day, got it figured out, bought 4 billboards, 2 going the route and 2 coming home. After they went up, she waited 30 days. This is a true story. She waited 30 days, made an appointment, went back in, sat down. He goes, boy, you should advertise. I see you everywhere on the road. You're advertising all over the place. So he authorized Warsteiner, put him in all the chain stores out there in the state, and that's how Warsteiner got distribution in his chain in the state of Florida. So these are the ways, or examples, if you will, what I'm talking about, that you're going to have to adapt, improvise, and overcome in getting into the distribution that your goals are, either through a wholesaler or through retail. Wholesalers today, the first thing that we're going to ask you after those topics about the quality and the marketing and so forth is, one of the key questions is, what chain authorizations do you have? Especially if you have packages. What chain authorizations do you have? So you can work it backwards. When I took Kronbacher on in 2010, I went to HEB first and got chain authorization first, which made it a lot easier to get into the chains to wholesalers, because they saw that. And it automatically, like, you walk in the door here, all you got to do is show up because you're already there. With your other brands, bingo, they already have volume. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when I talk about improvise, adapt, and overcome in the marketplace. So that's the analogy of the stories I was telling you about. So you see what I say? I say consulting, work harder, play harder. Yeah. Or in golf, the more I practice, the luckier I get, you know, that type of thing too. So that's what I'm talking about. So I guess we come to a point where this is a good time to take questions.
Does anybody have any questions? I know it's early on. This is our first week. You haven't had time to immerse yourself in all the material yet, but we're still open to any questions. Did we ever answer Bo's question of where's the accountability? There isn't any.
There really isn't any accountability.
Everybody's scared off about distribution now.
Well, you know, one of the things that's probably going through your mind is when you appoint a distributor, you have a contract. And many craft brewers, almost all of them, this comes to question. They're mandatory. See, yeah, this is, or you have to get, group opening involved with distributor. Oh, that's a good point.
Let's start with Ryan. What is a good volume for a brew pub to get involved with a distributor?
Well, that's a good question. If you self-distribute to start with, there's going to come a time during that process where you're going to outgrow it, outgrow your little brew pub. You're going to have to add tanks. You're going to have to add packaging wise if you go that route. You're going to have to buy more cooper. We get to anyway. Do that. So, you know, that's a business decision. I don't know if there's a certain number out there to do that. What I've seen, now you may have seen something different.
Well, we had to have a distributor from day one, so.
Yeah. Well, I usually see somewhere in that 3,000 barrel range, the 5,000 barrel range. Like Petticoat, I was talking about, his goal is 5,500 barrels this year. Now, he doesn't want to self-distribute, but he wants to sell his distribution rights, and he can't do that. So I'd say ballpark number is somewhere around that 3,000 barrels is where you can start really getting serious about it for a distributor to do that, unless you think otherwise. Now, in a franchise situation where you execute a franchise agreement with the distributor, you're going to probably personally want to a goal as an addendum in the agreement. In other words, first year you agree to sell 10,000 barrel or 10,000 cases, if you will, or 10,000 kegs or whatever the number is. And then the next year is 15,000, the next year is 20,000, whatever it might be. Understand, first of all, the distributor is probably not going to agree to that. Matter of fact, I don't know any distributors that will. And number two, even if they do, you're covered under franchise laws. And just because they don't hit it under franchise laws, that will not give you the right to terminate the agreement. Not going to happen. Unless you're in a state that the statutes say you can do that. And I can't think of any off the top of my head, and I've only been around for 47 years, that do that. So that's, you know, they may agree to it, especially initially. They may say, okay, here's what our target goal is. And we'll get into some of this target goals and distribution on-premise, off-premise down the road.
Better jump to it. We only have a few more minutes. So Jason wants to know, is there a mandatory barrel number where you have to get a distributor, or you can do it all if you want it?
You can do all you want to unless you're covered by statutes.
Depending on your state.
On your state, you know, if you have 10,000 ceiling, then you go 10,000, you got to find a distributor.
Both. Can you delve into how Stone Distributing came about and how they operate legally, being both a brewery and a distributor?
That's legal in California. You can do that. But also Stone was one of those brewers that couldn't find anybody to handle his product when he first started brewing. You know, I know Greg Cook real well. And he started, and he couldn't find anybody. And he was kind of like Windy City in Chicago. He started self-distributing by himself, and then everybody saw that. They couldn't find a distributor. They came to him, and he took on other brands. So those brands helped him, and he started, and he found out all of a sudden that this is pretty good business. And so he did. But also understand in San Diego, where he is, there were no options. The Budweiser house was owned by the brewery. They didn't want any other brands at the time. and then you had a Miller house and a Coors house, and they didn't want it, but they merged. It's kind of complicated, but that's kind of how they started. Then they got real big and they got real profitable, and they started doing it on their own, and they stayed that way. So that's how Stone got into the business, and I don't see them ever selling out on the distributor side now. Now that Reyes is down there and they own that Miller Coors house. The competitors help awareness of your brand in distributors' eyes or the word of mouth.
Competitions.
Competition help. Yeah, competitions help. Sure.
So you think if people have won some medals, like for example, Barley Brown, which tends to win a lot of medals, do you think that distributors look at that as?
I would encourage you to enter those contests. What it does help, it helps the consumer. In other words, this is sort of the gunny highway thing. If you can't do it directly on with the distributor, go around them. Build demand, consumer demand for your product by winning medals, because it's called the long tail theory in marketing. And maybe I get in it. If you look at a big bell curve, kind of like this, with a tail in the end, at the top of the curve is the major thing. The major brands like Budweiser, Coors, Miller. Then you go down the curve and you have all the other little brands. Well, there's a lot more brands at the small side. This is volume, if you follow me. In other words, if you took a CD department at Walmart, well, they have 55,000 CDs typically, or 5,500 CDs at a Walmart CD department. Well, if you're going to have 5,500 CDs at a Walmart, well, they're all going to be the big artists. Well, there's 2 million, 2.5 million, or more millions. Well, you get those online. And so that's the tail. So the tail's wagging the long tail theory. That's where it is. So typically in the craft beer business, it's the same way. You go the other way. It's the most effective way of catching their attention. Besides hitting them over the head with a baseball bat. But how important are incentives for motivating? Very important, and we'll get into that in another class. Is that second next week, isn't it? Incentives. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we get into that next week. The product education sessions at breweries, hosters. Yes, that's one of the key things. You're going to have to sales meetings kick off, but education. But you're going to have to do out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, quarterly is good. Monthly is better if you're in your backyard, if you can afford it. But quarterly is on key markets. You're not going to be able to do that everywhere. I had 260 distributors at Westapher. There's only one of me. Couldn't beat all of them, and even with sales staff, you couldn't do that. So quarterly for your key focus markets. That's managing your business, and we'll get into focus markets down the road, where you only have a certain amount of resources, that you could do that. You're not a Crown with Corona, or at this point, or even a Sierra Nevada, or those. You only have a certain amount of resources. You can only do it so often, and you can allocate your resources accordingly. Was the most successful brewery that has experienced exponential growth, the most aggressive getting there. I would say right now it's Lagunitas. Lagunitas is mind-boggling, boggling with their Lagunitas IPA. They're building a brewery in Chicago and they're expanding out here in California. It's just their IPA is. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. It's like. It's up 50% last year on top of 80% last year on top of, it's just unbelievable. All those others that you name are good too. Victory, Sweetwater, but Lagunitas is probably the personification of it at this point. Can you think of another one?
Not off the top of my head. It's hard to keep up with the whole country.
Yeah, people ask me all the time about certain brands and all that. Well, in 1980, I can tell you all about it, but I go to a store now, man, it's crazy.
Projected 1.1 million.
Yeah, first year of Chicago Brewery. Yeah, and they're just opening a door in Chicago. So.
Well, great, Geoff. That's a great session, great start. Glad to see you guys all can join. I think in the next session, which is in 2 weeks. Oh, we have a few things to say. First of all, there was a session scheduled for March 17th, and we realized too much conflict with a national
I'll be
holiday.
out drinking that night.
So we changed the last live session to March 18th. So there's a live session every other week. The next one, there'll be a guest with Geoff. I'll be on like you guys, and
You bet.
yeah, but otherwise it's Tuesday nights at this time, 2 weeks from now. All right, and what else were we going to say? Oh, don't forget to post for Geoff. He doesn't know who everybody is, so
Yeah.
please introduce yourself, guys.
Yeah. And also, I'm kind of computer challenged right now. I should be back up in 2 days, but right now, you send questions. If you don't hear back from me immediately within 24 hours, it's because my computer crashed on the airplane on the way up. So I should be back up and going within 2 days or so, okay? So I apologize.
Nice to see you guys.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Okay, dude.